Hey everybody, this is Blake here, and welcome to my review of Insidious Chapter 3. So, I have to admit, I almost forgot to do this vlog. I had filmed one on Sunday, except, like a total dumbass, I accidentally hit the mute button right before I started talking about Insidious Chapter 3. And so when I went to render the video, I noticed that there was no audio, and that was quite embarrassing, and then it just totally left my mind until I suddenly realized I still needed to talk about Insidious Chapter 3 and post it for your viewing pleasure. So, Insidious 3 it's okay. Nothing to write home about. It's weird because when I was writing my review, I realized I was being much more negative than how I really felt. I do think Insidious Chapter 3 fails in many ways. It's not a particularly well written movie. It doesn't really work as a prequel. It just seems kind of unnecessary. This is a story that did not really need to be told. However, I did think that it succeeded as a horror movie. Nothing exceptional or amazing, but I will admit that it did occasionally, or it did often make me jump and occasionally really got under my skin. So, part of my problem is just that Insidious is not franchise material, and that has nothing to do with quality either. Insidious was a good horror movie. Insidious Chapter 2, it was okay. People kind of had a mixed reception to that one. Or I should probably say reaction. But I didn't mind it myself. However, when you really take the story and break it down, it's Poltergeist. We've seen this scenario play out many, many times before. But what makes Insidious and its sequel stand out amongst the crowd is its style, primarily in terms of visuals. They are very distinct looking films that, when you place them up against other ghost stories, past and present, you've never really seen one quite like this, at least that I could think of. And that's really cool. That is a major reason why you should watch at least the first Insidious, and if you like that enough, then check out the sequel, but lower your expectations. But that still doesn't translate to good franchise material. Usually, the best franchises have a lot of wiggle room within their stories, and that doesn't mean they have to have, intricate plots. Friday the 13th, for example, shares the exact same storyline as pretty much every other slasher ever made, except there's so much they could do with those storylines. They could change up the locations, they could, mess with the tone, add a stronger supernatural element to the Jason character. Same with Halloween and A Nightmare on Elm Street. I don't always agree with what directions these franchises go in, but at least they're different directions, and that keeps them from ever really becoming stale. Insidious just doesn't have a whole lot of room to explore new territory, to do anything differently. It's just going to be the same old shit over and over again, and while this contributed to making Insidious a good horror film, it pretty much played all of its cards. You saw pretty much everything you needed to see about the further. You know pretty much everything that you need to know, and anytime a sequel will add to this, it just won't really feel necessary. However, shockingly, Insidious Chapter 2 did offer some potential, and that kind of made me excited for Insidious 3, in that you'd have a ghost psychic combating more malevolent entities. That's a little new, at least compared to the modern day horror trend that doesn't really try to think outside of the box. Unfortunately, Insidious Chapter 3 went the prequel route, and that made no sense to me. Were there really any loose ends that needed to be tightened? Were there any unanswered questions that really needed to be answered? I couldn't think of anything, and honestly, all I really got from this prequel was, okay, we know how Elise the psychic befriended the comedic relief duo. Oh, okay. If anything, I feel like ends were loosened because some of the information contradicts what we had gotten in the previous films. Like, for example, the Darth Maul ghost from the first Insidious. He makes a cameo at the very end and is apparently stalking the sidekick. Well, I was under the impression that he was just interested in the young boy, and then the sidekick, gets involved through him. So that just didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Plus, like when she's describing the Darth Maul ghost, you get the impression in the first film that she has never seen it before, whereas apparently that's not true. Why would ghosts want to even mess with the psychic lady? Because if anybody can defeat them, it's her. God, it's even more annoying with the woman in black who was stalking Patrick Wilson's character in the first film, and then she had possessed him in the second film. So her interest is in him, and yet she's somehow stalking the psychic chick, and that just doesn't make any sense to me. So, like, did this film offer anything new? Did it expand on the further? No, not really. It's just pretty much telling the same kind of story. A family is being haunted, and a psychic comes in to help them. Why? Why? Insidious Chapter 2 offered just such a cool ending that I wanted to see explored, and then they do this for absolutely no reason. But if you look past the prequel route, there's really nothing in the script that impressed me. I thought the dialogue was pretty weak. It varied between really corny, especially like when Elise does the "come on, you guys need each other" line, and when she stops the comedic relief duo from bickering, and I'm like, oh god, come on. Or it's just too on the nose with exposition. Nobody talks like that, and they're only saying these lines in order for the audience to learn something. But also, there's just a lot of fat. Like, why did the main girl need a brother? Like, at no point is he ever really in danger. I mean, yeah, he does introduce the family to the comedic relief duo, but anybody could have done that. They did not need this character for this bit. And, like, the main girl also has a best friend who you're kind of wondering if she's ever going to be relevant. Not really. The love interest. Why was he here? The film spends so much time setting up that he is attracted to this girl, and yet there's no payoff to this subplot. He leaves around the halfway point, never shows up again, so it's not like he appears during the finale and there's an implication that they're going to live happily ever after or anything like that. It seems like he was only there to set up one bit where she knocks on the door and then there's a knock that comes back and she thinks it's him, but it turns out it's not him, and it's like, that wasn't really worth it. The one thing I did like is that the father, who's your typical skeptic we've seen in all these movies, when he disbelieves that the girl is being haunted, it makes sense, and he's not being overly rude about it. He seems somewhat concerned for her, but he actually does address the issue directly, and I have to admit, he was probably my favorite character, and I thought his acting was the best. For one, he had the best dialogue, but I actually really liked that "this is my ass whooping face" line. But like when he's talking to his daughter about their his late wife and her mother, who had died like a year or so before the events of this film, I did feel genuine emotion. In fact, I will say that in total contrast to Annabelle, which felt like it was generated by some machine that could only work with cliches, I did feel like the writer, Leigh Whannell, I'm probably not pronouncing his name correctly, I did feel like he was trying to make us care, and it just, I don't know, maybe it was the stress of both him directing and writing this movie, but like I said, this could have used a script doctor, but I did feel like it was written by a human being. But I did feel something during that interaction, and he does, to his credit, the father, accept that maybe there is something going on as soon as the impossible starts to happen. And so I did like that. It wasn't like Paranormal Activity 2, where he's in denial up until the very end, and you just don't like this character for this reason. Um, but where it succeeds is, well, for one, the director recaptures James Wan's visual style so efficiently that if I was told that James Wan directed this movie, I'd believe it. So if you liked what you got from the previous films in terms of its look, its use of color, camera angles, editing, it's the same kind of movie. And I also loved the scare chords, and it's almost old fashioned score. There are some really, really powerful jump scares that like seriously got me, and yet those jump scares were earned. Sometimes, yeah, they are superfluous, but they still provided a good jolt, and you could tell that the audience was into it. And I always think that it's always fun to watch a horror movie with an audience, especially if it's a younger crowd, because I don't know, there's something fun about having everybody scream all around you. Unless you're watching a piece of shit, then it's annoying. But there's some very intense and suspenseful moments. So yeah, considering this was his first film as director, he did a great job. Not everything is perfect, but before I get into some of the flaws, let me just add that I thought the main villain was really creepy. I'm going to call him Bane Ghost because he kind of resembles Bane. I still think that the previous villains were more memorable, but only because I don't know, I can't really explain why, but it seems like this ghost is a little bit more prevalent than the Darth Maul ghost, and then the Woman in Black was more creepy in the first film than in the sequel, when she was just much more of a background character, much more mysterious. What makes this new guy very unsettling is that he has like this rapist vibe about him. So at one point when he attacks the girl and knocks her to the ground, and you see him close the door, trapping her with him as it goes completely black, it's very unsettling. And some of the imagery that really adds to his rapey vibe, it's very startling and very unnerving. My favorite scene is when he locks her in the room, just because there is a kind of a jump scare payoff, but just the way it plays out, it's freaky, but in a way that was pretty new. I can't think of a similar scene in the previous two Insidious movies. So yeah, even though he brings back James Wan's visual style, he also has his own bag of tricks that, even if the story offers nothing new, his scare tactics are pretty unique when compared to the predecessors. I did think he struggled with the pacing. It started off a bit too slow, but I could forgive that because the way it builds, like the creepier moments are more in the background, and there is something also unique about that. Like when you see this ghost waving, I did like that. However, it starts getting really repetitive during the middle block. How many times must the psychic say, "I'm retired. Okay, I'll help you. Oh, I can't do this. I'm sorry." I swear they go through that same freaking situation like 3 times, and it's like, come on, find some new material. Stop recycling yourself. So yeah, occasionally I my interest drifted in and out, but then the finale. It's a typical Insidious finale. Once again, we've seen too much of this. The further no longer holds any mystery to it, so you're just sort of waiting for the jumps to happen. And that's another reason why I don't think this is franchise material. And that's, once again, Insidious played all of its cards in the first film, and what few remained, played out in the second film. But now it's like, what can they do different with the further? That's why I always felt that Poltergeist was really smart to keep its otherworld in your imagination without showing you really anything. Because they could always do that in the sequels. while at the same time, showing off the further in the original helped contribute to its identity, which made the first film worth it, but not necessarily the sequels, even though the sequels are well-made movies. Um, Also, I did think the director struggled with the tone occasionally. With Insidious Chapter 2, and this was what got the movie a lot of crap, is that it seemed to have a very campy tone. Like, it's not really taking itself too seriously, and it wants the audience to kind of laugh at it as well as jump at the scares. And a lot of people did not like this. I wasn't too thrilled with it either, just because to me it lowered the stakes. I really didn't feel like it could end on a downer note just because of its tone. And I have no problem with a movie ending on a more uplifting note. It just, I want a certain amount of unpredictability. I don't want to know. I don't like with the Saw films. It was the total opposite. They always ended on downers, so it was hard to make an attachment to the characters because you knew they probably weren't going to survive the movie. With the first Insidious, you weren't really sure, but that's what it was going for. So I tried not to hold it against the movie too much. This film is taking itself a lot more seriously. However, there are a few unintentionally funny moments where you do kind of laugh, and I just think it was an inappropriate response to what is going on. Even sometimes there would be an intentional funny moment that is on its own pretty satisfying, like the last time, or the major confrontation between the psychic and the woman in black. There's a part there that actually did make the audience laugh, and they were supposed to laugh, and I laughed too. However, it's just, once again, it kind of took away from the tension. It lowered the stakes. But then there are other times, like when a ghost starts randomly singing, where it's just like, just a bit too much movie. You probably should have just trimmed that moment out. And I think that's really all I have to say. So it works in that it's a pretty solid horror flick. I mean, I got under my skin enough, had enough suspense, enough intensity, enough really good jump scares to make it a satisfying ghost film. But as a prequel, it added nothing. As its own story, there's nothing about it that's really going to stay within my memory. It's a below average movie, but an above average horror movie, if that makes any sense. So, see it if you want. If you liked the first two films, then yeah, absolutely check this one out. And go to the theaters depending on how much you liked the previous films. If you liked the first one, but didn't really care for the second one, I think you'll prefer this, but I don't know if it's worth seeing in the theaters. It just comes down to what your opinions were in regards to the previous films. If you have not seen Insidious or Insidious Chapter 2, you don't really need to watch this, or you don't really need to watch those films to understand this, but I don't see why you'd bother, because the first film is still easily the best. I'm not really sure if I'd say this is better or worse than the second. I think the second was an all-around superior movie, and that I took less issue with the writing, the dialogue, and the acting. The acting here it's okay. They struggle with the dialogue sometimes, but overall it's okay. However, this one I did think had stronger, or it's closer to being scary than the second one was. But read my written review if you want to see some clarifications on some of my opinions. I have also done written reviews of Jaws, which I also, well, no, I did not do a vlog on that, but I did do a review of Jaws, The Defender, a Dolph Lundgren movie, and my next one, which should be up tomorrow, is Star Wars Episode 4, which was a bitch to write for some reason, but I finally did get that done. And also watch my vlog on Spy with Melissa McCarthy. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys later.